I've gotten asked a few times, okay, maybe once, but I'm still growing this channel, about how I pick my stocks and analyze different companies. It's something that I've learned and evolved over time, and to be completely honest, at the beginning, I found most of my stocks by Googling best stocks to buy, which is not a great way to instill confidence in my investments. Anyway, there's no one right way to pick any investments, and I'm not a financial advisor, so this is just a general idea of how I pick and analyze companies. And notice that I say generally a lot. These are general rules, and I don't look at every single company the same way. Sometimes picking and analyzing your own companies can take a lot of time and effort, but something that doesn't take a lot of effort is bopping that like button and hitting subscribe for more content. Oh, and also index funds or ETFs are pretty low effort for investing, but that's for another video. If you're not a video person, firstly, why are you here? Or if you just want some supplementary information, there's a really great book that I read. It's called Warren Buffett's Interpreting Financial Statements. The title is a bit boring and it's a little bit tedious, but I learned a lot from this book. One of the biggest things, so before we get into numbers and other attributes you should look at, is picking the companies you actually want to invest in. And I think these companies should fall under roughly 3 categories: companies that you understand, like, and use their products or services. And I would argue that these 3 things are more important than numbers like PE ratios, EBIT, EBITDA, EPS, Horcruxes. That's not right. Anyway, moving on. Breaking it into the 3 parts, you want to invest in companies that you understand. So understand how they make money, how the product works, who their customers are, who their competitors are, and things like that. This honestly, for the most part, just gives me confidence. For example, if I invest in a company that I don't understand per someone else's recommendation and a bad earnings report or some bad news comes out, I would probably get freaked out and panic because I don't really know what I'm investing in. Second out of the 3 things, you want to invest in companies you like. This one is pretty simple, in my opinion. If you don't like a company, why should you buy it? Some people do buy companies that they don't like if the financials look really good. For example, PM, which is Philip Morris, they sell cigarettes and other nicotine products. It also has a really high dividend yield, so some people buy it because of that. But I personally don't want to invest in a company that makes these types of products. And also, side note, I know that Philip Morris is in the S&P 500, so if you own S&P 500 ETFs, you kind of own this on a side, but I guess that is the price you pay for more diversity and simplicity. And third on this list, it's generally a plus if you actually use this company's products or services. This is not always a requirement for me. For example, if you want to invest in Tesla, that doesn't mean you need to own a Tesla to do so, but it generally helps because if you really like the product, it makes you excited to invest in the company, and I found that through several of my investments. For example, I've been a long-time Spotify user. I absolutely love the service and the platform, and at this point, I use it so much every single day. Sometimes I think back to in like middle school, if I wanted to listen to music on my phone, I would have to pirate it and download it onto my phone. How things have changed. So anyway, I looked into the company a while ago and decided to invest, and as a side note, I am down slightly on this position, but my confidence in the product and the company itself make me excited to continue investing. So once you've found companies that you understand, like, and potentially use their products and services, the 2 main websites, I say this, but this is 4, the 2 main websites that I use to find information are Seeking Alpha and Yahoo Finance, which is the only useful part of Yahoo, but that's beside the point. There are plenty of websites and resources out there, so feel free to look around, but I like these 2 because they have all the functionality that I pretty much need. They are free. They do have paid services, I believe, but I don't use those, and they're really easy to navigate and read. So 2 numbers I like to look at very quickly for a company are the PE ratio and the revenue and margins over time. If you don't know, PE ratio stands for price to earnings ratio, and PE ratio means how much money you're paying for the stock relative to how much money the company makes. So if the company has a PE ratio of 100, that means you're paying $100 for every $1 of earnings. And very generally speaking, companies that have really high PE ratios tend to be more expensive. Again, I say generally because it doesn't apply to all situations, but you'll notice a lot of tech companies generally have higher PE ratios. One other thing to note is that you don't want to just look for companies with a low PE ratio, because a company with a low PE ratio could have really low earnings and just like an even cheaper price. So this one number should not be the only number, but it really does help get an idea of what you're paying for. The second sort of group of numbers that I really like to look at are revenue and margins over time. I only want to invest in companies that are growing and usually significantly year over year. This one is pretty self-explanatory. I'd rather invest in a company that's making more money every year than either being stagnant or even losing money. And revenue is the amount of money that a company makes, so obviously we want to see this go up over time. One other thing to note, that revenue is profit profit from. Revenue is different from profit. Profit, in rough terms, is the amount of money that a company actually keeps. That is to say, profit is revenue minus expenses. Companies have research and development expenses, maintenance expenses, and other things they have to pay. So they obviously cannot keep every dollar that comes in. For a very simple example, if you have a lemonade stand where you sell cups of lemonade for $1 each and you sell 100 cups, your revenue might be $100, but you also have to keep in mind that you bought the lemonade, the cups, the sugar, and I don't know actually if anything else goes in lemonade. So you had to buy those. So while your revenue may have been $100, your profit, or how much you get to keep, might be like $50 or something. I don't actually know how many lemons you would need to make 100 cups of lemonade, but that's beside the point. And connecting profit and revenue together, I like to look at profit margins and cost of revenue. Going backwards, I guess, cost of revenue just means how much money is the company spending to make more revenue. And generally, it's okay to see the cost of revenue rising, but in response to that, you also want to see the revenue increasing more than the cost of revenue is increasing, if that makes sense. So they're spending more money, yes, but they're making even more money, which would be a good thing. And kind of similarly, profit margins are essentially the ratio of what they keep versus what they earn. So if a company had ideally a profit margin of 1 or 100%, that means they keep every dollar that comes in through the door, which as previously stated is impossible because they have to pay their employees, there's research and development, and so on and so forth. This one is a little bit wonky because you'll notice between industries, profit margins are really different. For example, in the retail space, so think Walmart, Costco, Amazon, their profit margins are going to be a lot lower than more software companies like Google or Microsoft because they don't have as many overhead expenses. So you can't compare companies between industries. It's like apples and oranges. Another thing I like to look at is the balance sheet. And you'll notice if you pull this up, there are a lot of terms and a lot of numbers, and it is quite confusing. There is more information about what each one actually means in the book I mentioned earlier. Oh, also backtracking a little bit, a balance sheet outlines the assets, liabilities, and equities of a company. Anyway, on a balance sheet, the things I like to look at are the company's overall liabilities, so their debt, and their overall assets, so cash and other things they might own. And generally, you want to see more assets than liabilities. And if you think as like just a human being, if you have more assets than liabilities, your net worth is positive. If you have more liabilities than assets, you have a negative net worth. This one isn't always the case, especially with smaller companies, their debt might be higher, but you'll notice a lot of really big, really strong companies have a lot of assets relative to their liabilities. Another quick thing I really like to consider when saying, hey, do I want to buy this company, is the competitive moat of a company. If you think of a moat, I feel like I learned this in middle school humanities or whatever, but if you think of a castle where there's a bridge to get on and the entire castle is surrounded by a big moat of water, like a big river that you can't swim over for whatever reason, and the only way to get in is on the bridge, that's like a moat. So it's really hard to get into the castle, and a competitive moat is like a company that is really hard to compete with because they have some sort of advantage in the marketplace. And one example I always give for this one is Apple. It's over talked about, but whatever, here I am talking about it. I think Apple has a fantastic competitive moat or competitive edge that probably sounds a little nicer, makes me think of a sword instead of water. But to me, Apple's competitive moat is their integration within their ecosystem. Probably you, or very likely someone you know, is integrated into the Apple ecosystem. So if you notice, people who get iPhones or Macs tend to continue getting iPhones and Macs over time because it's so seamless to, what is it called, airdrop things between devices, and everything is so integrated that their customers just keep coming back, which I think is a great thing and is really hard to compete with. The last thing I look at for a company, it isn't so much informational, but it's called technical analysis, and this contrasts to, I guess, everything we talked about before is considered fundamental analysis. I'll probably make another more in-depth video about the difference, but everything before is like qualities of a company, what they make, do they have an advantage, and specific numbers, whereas technical analysis is more looking at the chart and being like, does this look like a reasonable price to buy in? For example, you might love a certain company and all the fundamentals look great, but if it's really overpriced right now, you might want to hold out. And I do this very roughly, just saying, if it looks really high and it's probably going to come down sometime soon, I'll wait, or maybe I'll pick up a little bit, and if it comes down, I'll get some more. I would say this one isn't as important as some of the other ones, especially if you're investing for 20-30 years from now. Like a month or two price won't make too much of a difference. But I guess a small example for me was in January when everything was going up so much. I did have some cash sitting on the side, but I was like, everything looks really pricey right now. So I waited, and there was much better buying opportunities later. But of course, you don't have to wait. You can just buy whenever. So that was a brief, I say brief, but my brief videos always come out ranty because I like talking. So here we are. Overview of how I pick companies and how I analyze companies that I might invest in. Please let me know what you look for in a company, and potentially a few companies that you really like. Maybe I'll look into them and start investing in them as well. And other than that, I hope you enjoy the new setup, and I'll see you soon.